You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to The Authenticity Show wherever you get your podcasts, and find us on social media. That means like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, check out our YouTube page, and tell your friends about the show. This helps us a lot, and we appreciate your support. Our guest today is Tim Ringgold. Tim Ringgold is a music therapist who uses the power of music to help people stay sober. A recovering addict himself, he definitely practices what he preaches. He's also the author of a book called Sonic Recovery: Harness the Power of Music to Stay Sober. He gave the first TEDx talk on music therapy, and earlier this year he opened for Tony Robbins. Now this is a pretty serious topic, but it's a really fun conversation. There's lots of laughter in here. And normally I don't personally get on the mic for these things, but since Tim's a musician, I figured I'd hop on, so we are a quartet this time.
Well, good evening, everyone.
All right. Hey, Carlos.
Welcome to the Authenticity Show.
Here we go. Here we go again. Yeah.
Yes,
Our guest for this episode is Tim Ringgold. And I think I'm saying that right.
You are. Hi, guys.
All right.
Nice to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
You're looking very dapper this evening, I have to say.
I appreciate that.
So, Tim, why don't you tell us what you do?
I use music to help people stay sober. That's what I do. And my title is Board Certified Music Therapist.
Why are you bored?
Classical music. Sorry. I'm a rocker. So, that's my title. My degree is in music therapy. I'm also a speaker on the topic. I gave the first TED Talk on music therapy. I'm an author. I wrote a book, Sonic Recovery: Harness the Power of Music to Stay Sober. So this is kind of my world, where I'm also a person in long-term recovery. So I walked into my first 12-step meeting for sex addiction in February of 2003. And nobody told me in any of my 12-step meetings the role music could play to either help or hurt my recovery journey. And it did both along the way. And so now, as a music therapist, I'm aiming music at recovery and using it as a clinical tool to help people in their recovery journey in a way that supports all the things they're trying to accomplish. And anybody who's pursuing a life of health and wellness, music can support. But music can also be used to trigger cravings and relapse just as easily. So I feel like it's like my mission to really educate people on their journey, because they could do great work all day in a recovery program and then go listen to their party playlist for 2-3 hours. And then it literally will trigger a craving in their nervous system. And then they act out and they have no idea why. Yeah. And they think it's all the hard work they did during the day. Yeah. And so then they equate the relapse with the hard work, and then they don't want to do the work. And really the work wasn't it. They just, kick their own ass with their own music inadvertently.
Yeah, the brain is really powerful at creating associations, isn't it?
Really powerful.
Yeah. That's something we make use of a lot in NLP and hypnosis and other kinds of change modalities.
Yeah, totally. So
music.
I go all in on the neuroassociations between people's playlists, the memories, the associated feelings, and then the triggered behaviors. And you can walk back those things. And I experienced it as a person in recovery. One of the types of music I listened to a lot when I was acting out was dance music. So, right?
EDM kind of stuff.
Yeah, love EDM, always have. Was a raver back in the 90s and still listen to EDM today. But early in recovery, I had to hit pause on EDM because it was so wired into this hunting ritual of wanting to get high to score, that if you put it on, within 4 or 5 beats, I would just feel in my veins like it would just activate this state. And music really does. It activates emotional states. It activates altered states. And anybody knows this from their own experience. Like you've been in an emotional state A, and then a song came on, and then instantly shifted your state, right? And it's that neuroassociation you had was the anchor to, shift gears. So it's a super powerful tool. And when I went to school for it, I was like, this is great because people love it. So it's going to be like this stealth transformation. Unlike Graston technique, which is not great,
No,
but
not fun at
effective
all.
for a physical therapist, you know,
Yeah.
using music, like I just feel like I have an unfair advantage because everybody has such a great relationship 90% of the time with it.
Yeah.
You're describing some really interesting things that I'd love to dive into,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Great.
So you said recovery from sex addiction.
Yep.
Can we today or tonight talk a little bit about sex addiction too?
Totally.
I would love to pick your brain about it.
Yep.
I have my own thoughts about it, but I'd love to discuss this a bit.
Sure.
What is a sex addiction, first of all?
Indeed. What is?
I mean, I ask that only with the frame that it's a biologically kind of natural thing, right?
Yes.
Sex is a part of life. We
Yes.
don't exist without sex.
Right.
And it's so tied to our survival as a species.
Yes.
So can we break that down a little?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So there's the world of what people think are substance use disorders, where they think that a chemical dependency becomes an addiction. So there's that world that people are used to when they think of like drug addiction or alcohol addiction. And then there's the world of behavioral disorders, which are behaviors that are done in a similar addictive way. Whether it's gambling or shopping, or overeating, or overworking, or overexercising, or under-earning. That's an interesting one out there. Compulsive debting, and compulsive sexual behavior is one of them. And so there's different definitions of addiction out there. So the one that I subscribe to is any behavior that, despite continued attempts to quit, the person experiences an inability to quit the behavior, and the continued use of the behavior causes negative consequences in their life. So if you just took all that down, you would say any behavior with continued use that causes negative consequences. 1, 2, 3. So you have like this criteria for it. Because the behavior, I may drink and then not drink, and there are no negative consequences in my life. And I may be able to drink or not drink, meaning I can control the use or the abstinence from drinking. So that behavior doesn't meet the definition of addiction for me. But for someone who's struggling with alcohol use disorder or is alcoholic, and we would say, they continue to drink, they try to stop, they can't, and it's wrecking their personal or their professional or both life, wrecking their physical health, their mental health, their social relationships, spiritual health, all getting wrecked. They know it oftentimes and just feel like they're riding shotgun in the experience. And the best way I try to describe it from my own personal experience is from the scene in Fight Club. The guy's riding shotgun in the car, and like they take the hands off the wheel and take the hands off or the foot off the gas and the brake, and the car just starts drifting. And the best way I can describe addiction from my own personal experience is it's the experience. Imagine being in a car and you're shotgun and you're heading towards a wall. And a minute ago, you were behind the wheel. And then something happened. And suddenly you have the experience of being kicked into shotgun without even your agreement.
Fascinating.
And now you're riding shotgun. You're like, fuck, what just happened? Someone just literally kicked you over. Fuck off. I'm taking over. And now you're shotgun. But you can't reach over and grab the wheel or hit the brake. You just have there's this force field. You just have this inability, like you're frozen to go left. Can't jump out the door. You're heading towards the wall. And you've hit that wall before. Like you see the wall. It's not like you don't see the wall. And you even fucking recognize the wall. I've hit that one before. I know what that's going to look like tomorrow. I know how that's going to feel. And yet you have the experience of not being able to do anything to prevent you from hitting that wall. And you go right into the wall. And there's no joy, there's no pleasure while you're heading towards the wall. Like you're already anticipating. The fun bus left years ago. And you're just fucking riding shotgun into another fucking brick wall. And you swear, this is the last time I'm ever going to hit this wall. And then you hit the wall again. And then you begin to not believe yourself or trust yourself because you've broken your word with yourself more times than you remember. You're not worthy of trust of others, so you sabotage your relationships with others.
So there's shame involved.
So, times 10. Yeah. Shame's probably the biggest weapon, and in the whole journey.
Yeah.
And then shame is a stressor on the nervous system, which triggers cravings to relieve that stress. So that's the addictive cycle, is you use and then you feel this horrible shame on the back end of using, which then triggers a craving to use again because you know what works to stop the pain. And that could be, for one person, that's porn. For another person, it's hookers. For another person, it's food. Another person, it's screens. It's video games. And it's that thing that works in the moment and just fucks you afterwards. Just like, fuck.
So there's a strong element of like a compulsion that you can't control, that seizes, or it seems to seize control.
Yes.
You become dissociative during the experience. You can't break out of it, so it's kind of like this hypnotic loop in a way. And that the net result is that your life feels like it's out of control, and then you kind of binge and purge kind of thing, in a sense, with the behavior.
Yep. And the two things fundamentally is that you have this sense like that you don't have any control, and you're beginning to lose the ability to like manage it. It's starting to fuck shit up around the sides, and it's like getting in the way, and it's like just starting to impede on other areas of your life. And if you're in a relationship, suddenly you're not having sex with your partner anymore because you're all fucked up on porn or hookers, and now reality is completely not interesting.
Question on that.
Yeah.
If your addiction is to sex,
Yes.
and you're not seeking it in porn, you're not seeking it in hookers, but you're with your girlfriend, for example, how is that problematic?
So you want to go back to the definition and look at the criteria and see if sex with your girlfriend matches the criteria. So let's say sex with your girlfriend. Okay, continued use, continuing to have sex with my girlfriend. Do I want to stop? No, we're in a great relationship. I feel connected. I feel this intimacy in the act. It's super pleasurable. We both have a blast. We get off. It's fucking carnival. It's awesome. Are there negative consequences to it? No, I feel connected. I feel this sense of union during the thing. I'm good. I'm in a really healthy.
No matter how much you're doing it, as long as you're getting shit done.
I'm in a really healthy, sexually active relationship because it's not leading down those two qualifiers, which is one, I want to quit and I can't, and two, it's leaving some sort of physical, emotional, social, or spiritual wreckage, pain, shame. If you're not feeling any shame after having sex 4 times in a night with your girlfriend, rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
That's fucking great.
Yep.
And that's what's really interesting about sex addiction, because it's like you can put down the bottle, but you can't put down your dick and you can't put down your libido.
That's for sure.
And so you really struggle with like, well, what's the difference between healthy sexuality and unhealthy sexuality? And really the answer is, well, do you feel connected during and after, or disconnected during and after? And that's a real great benchmark. And that's a very subjective experience. And being honest.
That way of framing it, because it's kind of maybe not an uncommon thing to say, oh, I'm so addicted to you, I love you so, oh my God, it feels so good, I'm so addicted, I think about you all the time. It's kind of like this desire, this erotic kind of thing, and that word is kind of flung around, addiction.
Yes.
And I personally have had a bit of a semantical kind of debate in my own mind about whether I like to even use the word addiction for things that are not medically, biologically addictive. Sure, there are patterns of dopamine, you can say that is being produced, things like that, but it's not the same thing. You don't die if you take away sex.
Right.
You die if you take away heroin or alcohol. So that's a chemical addiction.
That's an argument that we could argue over that.
Let's argue about it.
Yeah. So when you say you could die over heroin or alcohol, technically you can die if you were using enough heroin or alcohol and then you stopped cold turkey. You run the risk of dying of withdrawals during a very limited window.
Right.
So while technically your definition is accurate, that's thrown around with a lot of weight that doesn't consider the risk factors of other addictions that don't qualify for that one little area that you described. So, and I'll back up what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So the problem with addiction is that it leads people into risky behavior and risky environments because a lot of addictive behavior is illegal. And so you end up in situations in places that are unsafe.
Yep.
By the grace of God, I'm alive today. I ended up in so many unsafe situations where my life was at risk because I was pursuing sexual ecstasy in the moment.
Sure.
And suddenly I have someone on top of me who's 6'4" and she's strangling me. And she has absolutely the power to end my life in that moment. And I know it. And I just realized I got myself into a situation where if she literally just decided to just flex her windpipe, she could wipe me out right here. Oh, and we're in my mom's apartment right now. And she could rob my mom blind and my mom could find my dead body here. Oh, and when did I meet this person? Tonight. Oh, and what's her name? Oh, I don't even know. And the only reason I tell you that story is because that shit happens with unfortunate regularity.
Yeah.
And so when you're an addict, you put yourself into risky situations and people die from correlated behavior far more often than withdrawals. And I had a guy in treatment who one night, 6 months into treatment, he goes out because he thinks it's a good idea to use one more time. And whatever was in the heroin that night, because it's never pure heroin, made his heart stop that night because somebody mixed some dirty heroin, right? So it just made his heart stop. It might have had carfentanil in it, which now it takes 2 shots of Narcan to revive people instead of 1 because the chemicals that are putting in heroin is so intense these days. Another one of my guys, he's in recovery, he's in treatment, but he likes the dark side. He likes to mess with people. And he gets into the situation where he decides he's going to go out and he uses on Saturday night. And on Sunday, while he's out pursuing, he gets robbed because you enter a very dangerous world when you're out pursuing your addiction. The next day, he goes to confront the guy who robs him. The guy who robs him then stabs him multiple times. And he's left dying. And I find out because it's Wednesday and I'm leading group in 10 minutes. And he was in group last week, but he went out over the weekend. And now his mom was flying in from Virginia to take him off life support. And so he's there 1 week, he steps out, and because he enters the world of addiction, he dies. And so many people fall into those kind of stories that I think it's really important to talk about, that there's far more collateral damage in the world of addiction than just somebody dying from, possible overdose or withdrawals.
Absolutely noted and great points, 100%. I think I'm just searching for a different term for some reason. There's a I don't know how I can explain this. I believe that strongly unhealthy, like very, very powerfully unhealthy habits are lethal.
Yes.
Period. Compulsions are lethal.
Yes.
A psychopathic, homicidal maniac has an addiction, if you want to put it one way, or a strong compulsion another way. Either way, unhealthy behavior, ruining lives, he or she, are ruining their own lives, potentially putting themselves in position to be killed as well. It's possibly addiction, possibly a compulsion. Either way, I don't even know if there is a point anymore. It's like, as you're describing this, it's making sense that from the standpoint of a person going through something that difficult, that they can't help on their own. They don't know how to help on their own, that they're stuck in it.
Yep.
whatever that is.
And that's the key, though, whatever
Yeah.
that is, because
Yeah.
one person's alcohol is another person's work.
Yeah.
And this is a really interesting thing in the field of addiction studies, because there are people who are like, it must be a substance that enters the body.
Right.
But the behaviors cause the same reactions that the substances cause.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what you get addicted to, the reaction.
I think as I'm describing this, the reason for why it's important to me is coming out. And that is that words are powerfully influential and often capable of changing things significantly depending on how you understand them.
Yes.
They persuade, they influence, and can potentially imprison or free depending on those factors. So I always look for what is hidden inside these words, you know, what is
Yeah.
implied by them. And I think that one can use a word differently than another person and possibly even get to the same result. You know, for me, when I work with addictions and things like that, what people call addictions, I work on that because for me, getting access to that part of them that decides that they have no power is very important, because that powerlessness that's implied in AA technology, if you want to put it that way, works a certain number of cases, right? But it also fails in a certain number of cases, and I'm interested in those cases because those are the people who end up in my office. So I look for those little cracks in a way in the concept, because for me, it's not really ultimately about right or wrong, but it's about understanding all these possibilities and what can be flexed and what can't be, you know? And I look for those things because that often is the difference between someone getting a result, not getting a result. So for me, it's really crucial that I actually see this. And I love that we're having this conversation because I appreciate your point of view and your experience, your life experience. That's two very important things to me. And you've had success in for how long?
17 years.
Okay. So you have a long history of having this work for you. So that's why your opinion is valuable to me. Even if we have overlapping or disagreeing outer parts of our opinions.
And that's
you know?
fine, because even in the addiction treatment community, everybody is sitting at a conference over beers, no joke, arguing over lots of different points, contact points within addiction.
Yeah.
And there isn't a lot of consensus, really, truly, in the community. And so there's debate all the time. And people just come to, you know, where they set up shop, you know, and they're like, yeah, we might not have the same, you know, thing. And like, there are people who believe in abstinence, and then there are people who believe in harm reduction. And abstinence is like cold turkey. You're never going to do that behavior again. Harm reduction is like, let's look for a steady decrease in frequency, intensity, and duration. And if we can taper down a behavior to a point where it's not causing all this shame and causing all this wreckage, and you're managing the behavior, but it's not out of your life, does it still meet the definition anymore?
Right. Well, that actually brought me to the next piece of my question, which is you mentioned earlier in the definition of addiction that one of the aspects was attempts to stop the addiction, right? Yeah. So to stop the behavior of the addiction, which if you say sex addiction, then implied in that is stopping sex. So is the goal of a sex addict to just not have sex anymore?
No, that's a really great question. And I think that sex addiction as a phrase is not an optimal phrase.
Which
it's
is
a
what I'm
shortened
getting at.
Yeah, it's a shortened phrase for compulsive sexual behavior as determined by or as evidenced by blank. And it's interesting, like alcoholism, like certain words, like you were saying, like words, like where do they come from? Like, and even in the addiction treatment world, like nobody uses the word alcoholism, alcoholic. Those are not clinical terms. You know, substance use disorder is a current term, but it evolves. And so chemical dependency, like these words, they evolve over time also, which is interesting, right? And we can segue this back to music therapy too, because there's an interesting parallel because of this very thing. Like, is this the best description? Kind of like defund the police. Really, guys? Was that really the best marketing option out there? That was not a good marketing move. If you want to piss off a lot of people really quickly, say defund them. Oh, no. What we really mean is no, too late.
Too late. Yeah.
Now, fuck you. You know what I mean? Like that was like really bad marketing, you know? So sex addiction, like, yeah, for sure. Because like we described, is the behavior itself healthy or unhealthy? Depends on the person, depends on the time. You can have unhealthy sex with your partner the night after you have healthy sex with your partner.
Right.
And so
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's really nuanced, you know, and that's why, like, you work with a sponsor and you don't try to figure this shit out in your own head, because you need to be talking this shit out loud to somebody else that can hear the bullshit when it comes up and then feedback what's not, you know? And so that's one of the great parts about the 12-step community, imperfect as it is the mentor model of having somebody whose brain is dried out longer than yours from whatever it is, who stands as a feedback post, a listening post, someone who allows you to become two instead of one, so we connect, right? You speak instead of think, right? So speaking and writing incredibly more organizing to thought than thinking.
Yeah.
Because are we really thinking or are we being thought?
Yes. Because a lot of the thoughts are arising from very old things in our consciousness. Stuff like loyalties to who we once thought we were, loyalties to the family, loyalties to beliefs that we accepted as a child. These things, if we don't break them, we continue them.
Yeah.
You know,
Like
and
programming.
And it's programming. Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
it's at the root of why we're making decisions, and we're not even questioning why we're making the decisions we're making. They say we make 30,000 decisions a day. I'm not tracking them.
No.
How many of them are conscious? Like
Yep.
very few of them.
Yep.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I have found that I have this analogy. Okay. So it's 2016. I'm at this one-day training with a guy who's getting his second neuroscience PhD, and he's getting it in like human performance, like productivity. He works with like corporations to really like unlock peak states of productivity for employees. Awesome. Great gig. He's making $1
really cool.
million. Geez, really interesting way to go. And as someone who's really interested in neuroscience and the intersection of music, I was like, well, that's a completely different place.
Flow states.
Yeah. And so he's looking at it through this one way. I'm looking at it through another, and I'm listening to him speak, and he's talking this one day, and he's like, all right, so I want to tell you guys about cardiac neuroscience. Okay. He's like, I'm getting my second neuroscience degree, but I'm not graduating. It's just so I have access to all the research before it gets published, because by the time it gets published, it's obsolete. Wow. And I'm like, oh, okay, give me what's hot on the press right
cool
now.
hack.
Yeah, isn't that neat?
Yeah.
And he's like, because otherwise it's like it's too late. And so I was like, all right, game on.
And then he can keep his student loans on deferment.
That's it.
So that's the second
That's
hack.
the
I'm
other
sorry.
hack.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
okay.
oops. There's another hack
Practically
for you.
thinking. Yeah. So he says, yeah, this field of cardiac neuroscience, like we finally figured out that the heart is a center of thought and the gut is a center of thought. He goes, and now we can measure it in neuroscience, in Western medicine. And he goes, and what we found is the transmissions are happening at 1 million times the speed of neurotransmissions in the brain. And he was like this little kid, like, isn't that cool? And as a fellow neuroscience geek, I was like, oh, that is so
Wow.
cool. Let's just chew on that for a second, because Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink had just come out.
Preconscious processing.
Yeah. And while it's not a scientific book, it's definitely a collection of essays and arguments as to the existence of.
For sure. Lots of
this-
great anecdotal stuff. in there.
Yeah. It definitely contributes to the conversation.
I love that book.
And so he's like, yeah, so I came up with this analogy of the human body as thought. So here it goes. The gut, it's the first floor of a 2-story colonial with an attic. Because I grew up in New England, so like 2-story colonial with an attic. The gut, first floor. A lot of tile, a lot of hard surfaces. Everything goes in and out. Like it's like the first floor of a house is where like you come in, you go out. It's very transactional. There's a lot of movement on the first floor of the house. Things move fast. The gut. Then you have the heart, second floor of the house. A little softer. Got some carpet. got some sheets, got some bedding. It's intimate. Not everybody gets invited to the second floor, right? Like you have a house party, everyone's on the first floor. Like this is a little more, intimate space, a little more private, protected, vulnerable. And then, podcast listeners, I'm pointing at my head, you have the attic. And it's dusty, and it's not climate controlled, and you can't move very fast up there, and it's cluttered, and there's cobwebs, and there's boxes, and there's like, if you move too fast, you rake your head on like a nail, and you get caught. And so you just have to move really slow, and it's just not well lit, and it just sucks because it's too hot or it's too cold. It's just not optimal for hanging out in. And I left that day thinking about like life through that lens, like coming from my heart, coming from my gut versus trying to navigate this attic of my brain. And I shared this with my sponsor, and he's like, well, that's why we're on the phone. He's like, because when we're on the phone, we're on the second floor. When you're home in your room by yourself, you're in the attic, and that's no place to be. And I was like, I agree. I agree. And so I really liked that, when we connect heart to heart. And that's why at the beginning of the conversation, the love of, oh, look who it is. Ladies and gentlemen, podcast listeners, an unexpected cameo appearance from Kim Lee. She just rolled in, and it's like shooting footage.
The one and only.
Look at this. Holy cow.
Woman of the year.
And I do not allow things to just happen like below the radar, so I have to call all this shit out. It's not even my podcast. Sorry, guys. I'm like,
it's cool.
hogging this.
Love it.
Hi, Kim.
It's good. Hey, Kimmy. So, Tim, you said the word connection.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting. I think we've kind of come full circle to something that here on this Authenticity Show, something that we've been trying to promote more, which is this idea that when people are addicted to something, right? And I'm just using the word loosely, addicted to something, and they view themselves as an addict, they have an identity around it.
Yep.
And they say words like clean, like I've been clean for this many years or that many years. Carlos and I often talk about how that immediately implies dirty.
Yes, thank
you.
you.
So you're thinking about this. And something that we want to do is change that. So when somebody says, I've been clean, we don't want that anymore. So maybe you can help us with this. Is we want people to say, I've been connected now for 17 years, for 10 years, something like that. Because there's evidence, right, that people that have various addictive behaviors, that they do feel disconnected from life, from society, from the universe, whatever it is. And the things that help those people tend to be things that create a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. And so it's kind of interesting that we came back around to this topic, because we started this conversation really talking a lot about sex addiction.
Yeah.
And I had a great time watching, being able to eavesdrop on this part of the conversation because, I love it. I spent 11 years working at an alternative opiate addiction clinic.
Oh, wow.
Which does not use a 12-step program. It's not like a traditional type of program. It's more of a medical detox. It's a great place. It was the Weissman method for opiate addiction. And so I got to meet people from all over the country, people from all over the world, different cultures that all shared addictions to opiates. And some of those people did amazing, and some of those people just kept coming back, right? And got a chance to meet very, very, very wealthy people that are the captains of their industry with the same addiction as people that were sent there from the judge, right? And everybody in between. Yeah. And, whether you're rich and famous or homeless, they all share that feeling of disconnectedness. Yeah. And then what happens is they do feel connected by the community of other people that share the same addictive seeking behaviors, right? Or the same, the same behaviors leading towards whatever satisfaction they get from their choice, right? Whatever that choice might be. But then what happens is those people that do the more like traditional 12-step programs and things like that, which help lots and lots of people out there. And I'd say that world is a world of pioneers. I mean, who else is doing it? They're doing it. They're and they're learning as they go, and they've been learning a lot, as they've gone for many, many years. So the issue comes up, what's next? How does it evolve from there? How does it continue to grow? How does it get better? And I love this idea of moving more towards connection, right? And letting go of the identity of being an addict.
Yes.
And it's just a personal I get that the recovery model has helped lots and lots of people. Great. I've also met lots of people that it doesn't help, right? And I think for those people that it doesn't help, which is a big chunk of the population, I want to invite people to start letting go of the idea of, I am an addict, I am always an addict, I will always be an addict, right? Because that's an identity.
Yes.
Right? And the thing is, no, you're connected now. As soon as the toaster is plugged into the wall, it is connected to the same circuit as all the rest of the electronics in the entire city and the entire country, right? Everything on the grid, right? Once you're connected, you're in, you're connected, you're there, you're part of it. This kind of comes back to some of the neuroscience on addictive behaviors. You guys were talking about like what words do we choose for this, right? In occupational therapy, we often use the term blank-seeking behavior, and we're not the only people that do this. Other professions do this. In the mental health world, people have sexual-seeking behavior, right? Drug-seeking behavior, and I like that terminology. I think it's a pretty good, way of describing it, because what is it that the person is addicted to? It is the behavior that seeks the thing they want. It's not their identity, and it's not the actual thing they want. And this is backed up by neuroscience, right? So, now, this might sound crazy, okay, but it's not the sex that the person wants. It's the dopamine release they get during the seeking behavior that leads to the payoff, not the payoff. So the sex itself or the gambling itself, winning the jackpot, at the casino.
It doesn't stop them from
right.
doing it.
Because it wasn't.
The next day.
That was never it to begin with.
Yes.
It was the dopamine release they got for the behavior that led to the payoff. And they've done this research with pigeons and stuff like that. Like the pigeons hit the button, they get the pellet, and they eat, right?
They've done it with porn.
Right, yeah.
They've done the research with porn, and the dopamine release doesn't happen. That's okay. Hi, puppy. Hello. It's pretty fascinating. It happens during the viewing of the porn, not during orgasm. So you're high, and I can tell you this from personal experience. I'm high as a kite watching the porn. That's when I'm high. And I'm watching it for hours. And I'm edging, which is not ejaculating,
right,
so that I can stay high. Because what happens when I ejaculate? I'm no longer high.
Right.
Now I come down.
It ends.
It ends.
The dopamine fix is over.
The dopamine fix is over.
Yeah.
And I've looked in the mirror and I have seen the same bloodshot eyes after a night on porn that I've seen after all night at a bar or smoking weed.
Yeah.
I am fried, just as fried, and felt just as spiritually empty and disconnected. And that dopamine thing, it's what it's all about. And I joke with the guys when I'm working with them, I always ask them, what's your kryptonite?
Oh, yeah, that's great.
That's my thing. I'm like, cause it just doesn't discriminate. Your fucking kryptonite is not the same as yours. It's not the same as yours. It's not. And yet, because when they're in a treatment center, they're not in there for the same substance. They're in there for substance, right?
Yeah.
So you'll have guys in there for opiates, and then you'll have guys in there for alcohol, and you'll have guys in there for meth, and so, but they're all in there for this same reason. So I always, what's your kryptonite? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, what's the thing you're fucking powerless over, dude? Like, you can fucking shave and cut your hair and drive your car and do all kinds of, hold down a high stakes job. You can do all kinds of high stress, high things in your life. You've walked away from this, you've walked away from that, but there's this one thing you can't fucking walk away from. And they're like, that's fucking it. I've been able to walk away from everything. And that's, and so that hit is unlike any other hit for them. Mm-hmm. Why is it porn for me? I don't know. I mean, I have a theory. I have a pretty good theory as what it was and where it came from, what my origin story is, why it isn't alcohol, why it isn't weed, why it isn't shrooms or, anything else that I've tried. But what's really interesting is, most people walk away. Most people really do walk away from recreational substance or behavioral use after about a 10-year period. Statistically speaking, the vast majority of people stop using substances after about 10 years. And there's a small percentage who can't. So then the real question is, what's driving the dopamine behavior? So are they trying to get high? And what you'll hear is, no, they're trying to escape. So then the question is, what are they trying to escape? And the real answer is pain. Because when you go to work with people who are having addiction, 100% of them have some sort of either diagnosed or undiagnosed trauma in their history. And so what they found was they found a way to disconnect from the pain. Because we either try to avoid the pain, right, or seek the pleasure. And what I try to explain to people is, sometimes there's like this pleasure-seeking experience, and it starts that way. And then, but there was something that it solved. There was a problem it solved. And one of the best quotes I ever heard is Gabor Mate, who's a recognized addiction specialist, thought leader.
Brilliant man.
He's like, addiction isn't a problem. Addiction is a solution to a problem. It's just a shitty solution.
Yes.
And the problem is that they have some sort of pain, whether it's physical, emotional, social, or spiritual. They've experienced some sort of pain. And that one fucking thing did it when nothing else did. That one thing took the pain away when nothing else did. Yeah. And then their brain was like, fuck yeah, do it again, rinse, like the amygdala was like, number one answer, it was like fucking, like I always try to explain it. It's like Family Feud. Your brain it'll try lots of different behaviors, but there's this one that works better than any.
And you've reminded me of some research that was done on, it was pain research, chronic pain research. It was done at Loma Linda, my alma mater.
Oh, no
right?
kidding. Cool.
And we've talked about this before, Carlos. And this is one of the things I love about the kind of work that Carlos does, like the NLP, the hypnosis and stuff with clients. It ties into this research that was done. So this doctor there had a bunch of people with chronic pain watching a video of a stand-up comedian or stand-up comedy. Yeah. And they sneakily got in there and did their assessments and everything. And then pretty much what they ended it with was, okay, like while everybody was laughing, while they were in the state of this is hilarious, right? During that time, nobody could ever remember having pain, right?
Yes.
And so the question comes up, why can't we all get addicted to something wonderful like laughter, joy, humor, right? And I think we do. I think we do. Now, Carlos would say, hey, I know a few techniques to do that, right? But I think it's just kind of a fun thing to talk about, right? There are substitution patterns. There are substitution opportunities.
Absolutely.
In these worlds of addiction or whatever it is you're seeking.
Yep.
It would really be nice to be seeking laughter rather than meth. I'm just saying. Most of the time, that would be a nicer thing to be seeking.
So when we think about our nervous system, we kind of have three main gears that we operate in. And our default gear is really a connection state. It's a state of connection. Our normal chill mode, ventral vagal state is a state of connection. And then a perceived threat occurs and we change gears into our sympathetic nervous system response. Now we go into protection mode. So we go from connection to protection. This is where we hear fight or flight response. Yeah. That's that second gear, right? Now we're in reactive mode, right? We're not relaxed. We're not connected. We're not also in creative mode because when we're relaxed, that's when we have access to creativity. When we're stressed, we're in reactivity mode. And then that third gear, when you're watching the nature special and the gazelle's caught and it freezes, And you're like, why isn't it screaming to death as they're having lunch on it? That's that third gear of our nervous system where we go into shock, we go into freeze, we shut down, right? And the dorsal vagal state of our nervous system. And when we're designed to connect, we're in a default mode to connect, and then something threatens us. And then we try to solve that. We either run or we fight, right? And that was by design, I'm going to fight off a tribe, or I'm going to run from a tiger, right? But in that mode, we can't create. We can only react.
Yes.
And so we have to be able to turn that stress response off first and foremost. Relax the nervous system, get it to feel safe, and then it can connect, and then it can create. And one of the beautiful things about music is it turns off the stress response, and it allows a person to feel safe. It allows a person to feel connected. Because music by itself won't ever backstab or talk shit or judge or lecture or scold anybody. And this is why a teen is in their bedroom listening to music and not in their living room. Because in their living room, they get judged, scolded, and lectured. In their bedroom, the music takes them right where they are with all the feelings they have, the way they're feeling them, what they're thinking. The music just accepts them. So they feel connected and they feel safe in their bedroom alone. They feel more connected alone than they do in a group of people. And that's the power of music when used correctly, is it creates this safe place for the nervous system to reset, right? And then now from this place, once my nervous system's reset, I can create, right? I can think differently, right? I can actually project all these things I can't do in a stress response. And I think that's one of the things that in our hyper-stressed world right now, one of the big challenges is we're chronically stressed because of the amount of decisions we were talking about that we have to make on a daily basis. There's this great coach named Dan Sullivan. He talked about this stat, and I heard it about 10 years ago. He's like, the number of decisions we make in a day today is the number of decisions the human brain had to make in a year in the late 1890s in London, in the center of the most advanced city at its time. The average brain made the same decisions in a year as it makes in a day. Now, I don't know where he got that stat, but talk about decision fatigue and overstimulation.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
That's our current world, right? Yeah. And our nervous system was only designed to be activated occasionally into second or third gear, right? Yeah. And now it's stimulated daily, and it just stays in second gear. Right? And it's so hard for us to see past the last time we did something to just survive the moment, It is so hard. And when anyone finds themselves in recovery, when anybody makes it that far, for me, it's a genuine miracle. It's a miracle.
There's a wonderful double entendre embedded in what you just said. When anyone finds themselves in recovery.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Because that's the first place of connection. So going back to recovery, recovery is reconnection. Reconnection is recovery. We start out as connected spirits. We're connected to all. This is my little bend. I am part of the all, the everything that is energy. This is just Tim spouting his little personal spiritual outlook. I am a tiny fraction of the all, the everything, which is the unified field of energy, which can't be created or destroyed. It's all. It's everything. It's everywhere. It's in every cell. It's in every atom. I'm a tiny fraction of it walking around in a meat suit rental called my body with an identity, with a name Tim, right? But I came in naked, but I came in connected.
A dapper meat suit.
A dapper meat suit. Well, we all got to work on dressing up these meat suits. Yeah. So, but I came in physically connected to my mother. I came in emotionally connected to my mother. I came in spiritually connected to all things. And then there's this process of disconnection that occurs. And that disconnection is deeply traumatic to the spiritual self, because you get to a point where you suddenly have a thought, or the thought has you. Am I alone? Because I'm an individual in the meat suit. Does that mean this is where the connection ends in my physical material self, because I live in a very physical materialistic world? Is this it? That's a terrifying thought for a lot of people. And particularly having worked in hospice, when people are staring at their future is very, very much smaller than their past. Existential questions are laid bare right there. Like there's no time for sports and weather because we're at the end.
Yeah. there you
Here's
go.
Tom with the weather.
That's
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
right.
And when we get to that point, now it's like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Am I alone?
Definitely. Tim, when you were describing all this, you reminded me of that old band, the Meat Puppets. Did you ever hear the Meat Puppets?
I remember
course,
the
the Meat Puppets
name.
are great.
The Meat
Yes.
Puppets, yeah.
Yes.
And I think when somebody is on hospice, it's interesting. Just before I came over here, I spoke to my neighbor. His wife just passed away today on home hospice, right? And so that was just right next to my home today, right? So I'm very much, in this frame of mind, thinking of these kinds of things. And I think, being disconnected, like you said, is a painful, it's a traumatic experience. And yet, getting reconnected again is the most natural thing in the universe.
Right.
It is so natural to just go ahead and be connected because we normally are, right?
Yes.
It's like we start thinking, okay, so I'm a meat puppet, right? But I'm also the puppeteer, right? I'm the puppet and the puppeteer, and who are those two anyway? Well, wait a minute. Well, who am I? If who are they? So there's the meat puppet and there's the puppeteer and then there's whatever I am that's watching these guys. So and we're all the same. I don't know. This
Thanks
is
for the
getting
reminder.
weird.
That's
Yeah.
good.
getting weird.
I have a question. You're talking about these spiritual ideas, and I'm wondering, did your ideas about spirituality evolve along with your recovery? And what is the relationship between spirituality and recovery?
Ooh, two great questions. So my spirituality evolved independent of recovery. My recovery journey, my spirituality definitely, like I explored my spirituality and I did actually battle in my spirituality, in my recovery, throughout my recovery. And I know for a lot of people, that's a hot topic in recovery because they can collapse spirituality and religion,
Okay.
being two different practices, actually. And so when spirituality, so having just said that, I should define them for the purposes of the conversation. Religion being a practice towards a way of either thinking, believing, and then spirituality being a personal relationship that's very much by comparison, individual to religion, which is very much by comparison collective, with a social aspect to it, and spirituality being much more of an intimate, personal, non-social journey.
That's a pretty good. Those are good definitions. I like that.
So just to kind of tease them out, like, because I've experienced religion without spirituality, and I've experienced spirituality without religion.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the reasons I went back to religion in my early 30s was I was missing community in my spirituality. So that was what led me back after leaving, right? It was that very thing.
More connection with your connection.
That's
right?
exactly
Yeah,
right. I really
yeah.
wanted that multiplier effect, like a great movie or a great show or a great band. I didn't want to go to the concert alone. And so I was looking for that communal experience.
Well, there's this thing that people tend to find religion or spirituality when they hit rock bottom.
Yes.
My wife likes to joke that Jesus spends a lot of time hanging out in prison. Like, is spirituality a necessary part of recovery?
What I've noticed is for people in recovery that adopting a spiritual practice that worked for them was a game changer for their recovery journey. It wasn't just like an enhancement. It was like a game changer. Like the world changed for them when that part of their life became like a real viable breathing part of their life.
Have you ever known somebody who has recovered from something, from an addiction, like really recovered, without a religious or spiritual element?
That's a great
Like,
question.
is
Do
there-
I know
is there
any
one counterexample?
Yeah. Do I have any atheist friends who are recovered? Like, yeah, I would have to say I don't know them personally, but I would absolutely assert that they are there because there are really great recovery approaches that have nothing to do with spirituality. One of them being smart recovery, which is very much based in neuroscience and very not spiritual at all. And in fact, it was invented as like a antidote for those who were just like, fuck spirituality. I don't have any place for it, but I want tools and I want a way to work differently. So somebody create a frame that could work. And that's what I am definitely a many paths guy. There are definitely people in the recovery world who are like, it's my way or the highway. This is the one true faith of recovery. And then there's those of us who be like, fuck,
True
man,
believer.
listen, whatever, like, here, my test for spirituality is like, or for believing in something is like, hey man, if it gives you the courage to get out of bed in the morning, it inspires you to be your best self during the day, and it comforts you enough to turn your brain off at night and fall asleep, do it again tomorrow. That's my test.
Altruism,
You know?
having something beyond yourself.
Yeah.
Those are values that approach what people might call spirituality.
Yeah.
I think.
And for me, spirituality is just the connection of experience. It's the experience of being connected to something outside of myself.
Right.
And that, like, I remember I had to
Purpose.
give a talk one day on spirituality and music. And as I was trying to define like where the Venn diagram was, it came back to connection.
Yeah, because I was going to say, in all those years that I worked with opiate addicts, a lot of the people that went there because they were not particularly religious people, and they didn't want a more traditional recovery model. They wanted more of a medical model. But the people that were successful, kind of to come back to your question, Oliver, the people that were successful, even though a lot of them did it without something that they would call spirituality, they didn't do it without connection. Whether they were connecting with the kindness of the staff, with the therapist that worked there, with how nice the doctor was, with how helpful the cook was, the chef in the kitchen, me, the acupuncturist, the massage, they still had connection.
Love that.
They might not have called it any version of spirituality, but I think it basically, what is spirituality? Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, it stands to reason too that, piggybacking off what you said about identity, because I believe the same thing that you were talking. We've had many discussions about this. I totally see eye to eye on that. That identity can serve as a vehicle for what you perceive as a purpose. So in other words, if you discover what your purpose is, or your reason for living, or your mission, your vision, all those things, if that's there and it's alive and present in your life, who do you need to be in order to achieve those things and to do those things? That's your identity.
Yep.
So it could very well be that, obviously like beliefs, values, identity, purpose, mission, vision, all of them are subsets of that word belief, technically. But experientially, it seems as though you could put purpose, mission, and vision way at the top, because it's what's beyond you, and it's a reason for being, and it takes you very, very far. So it stands to reason that if you had a very toxic set of behaviors, an addiction or whatever, that if you want to have long-term success at not just surviving and getting through it, but actually thriving and reaching a point of happiness, that you have to transform your life in such a way that you have purpose, you have something that's beyond you.
Yes.
And I think most anyone would probably call that a spiritual point of view.
Yep.
Yep. It's at least approaching the idea.
Yeah, totally.
Even
And I
if you
think
don't like the term.
You're nailing it right there, because somebody I interviewed a month ago, we talked about transforming, recovery, like what was the most transformational part of his recovery. And he said it was a commitment to service, to really thinking about another human being rather than myself. And for him, that was spirituality. It showed up in the act of serving another, putting another's, needs ahead of yours in the moment, which would be an altruism, model. And I loved it because I think, again, going back to the whole spirituality religion kind of collapse, that's a tragedy for me, because I think it prevents a lot of people from discovering that they're very spiritual people, because they just have the two words to enmeshed with each other and going back to words, right? Like they're like, no, it must mean these both. And I'm like, no, what if it only meant this right here? And they'd be like, oh, well, I'm spiritual as fuck.
Right.
And be like, yes, you are.
Right.
You have been the whole time. on. They'd be
Yeah.
like, I had
Spiritual
no idea.
AF.
Namaste. Like they write,
Yeah.
then suddenly they would have
Exactly.
this whoosh.
Yeah, totally.
And that identity that you spoke of, like, for me, that's the point of incarnation is identity for me. Because as if I'm one and I am all of everything, I'm we. If I want to experience in a relative physical experience me, I need to actually break off from we in order to experience me as a singularity, as an individuation.
Yeah.
And therein lies the rub. That's like it's like going out on the spacewalk. I want to float, but I don't want to float away. So there better be a fucking tether, or I'm not fucking going out there. I'm not, not worth it.
Right,
Not going to try. Right. So then it's like, okay, well, if that's the game, what are the practice? What are the tethers? How do we stay connected?
Yeah.
How do we stay connected when we go out on this fucking spacewalk in this meat suit? The spacewalk in the meat suit. There's the book. That's our, right?
I like it.
We're
That's
writing
it.
it tonight.
We
was
are
born
actually
here.
doing it. I think it's an apt metaphor. I love it.
Spacewalk in a meat suit.
It's a song. You know.
You're reminding me of something I learned about. I was probably 18, reading about psychedelics research, and there was this set of alcoholics that were considered pretty severe alcoholics, and they submitted to LSD psychotherapy.
Yes.
And they had no clue what LSD was. They had one of the preconditions is they can't have tried it before. They can't have done any other drugs, just alcohol, because they really wanted to keep kind of a clean set of tests with it. And pretty much all of them did. I think it was a couple of weeks of pre-psychotherapy and then a really powerful psychedelic experience. So they took like maybe 250 micrograms or something like that, a good solid hit for someone who's never done it before.
Right.
And then a couple of weeks of follow-up. And I remember seeing a little bit of some clips of the films, and they were showing this fellow who had just destroyed his family life because of the addiction, as you know, how bad it can be. And while he was peaking, one of the things that was in the room was images of his family, some black and white photos. And there was a rose on the table, and he, all by himself, as he was looking at these images, the psychotherapist was kind of guiding but not interfering, just sort of like, so what's going on for you now? And, what do you think about this? And just kind of a few questions here and there. But for the most part, it was self-guided. He was letting that person's innate sense of balance return as he began to look at these photos and feeling really heavy pain, like the darkness of what he had done and how much disconnection he had felt, speaking of connection, and how much sadness and grief he had felt and anger at himself for all the things that he had done. And when he looked at the rose and was thinking those thoughts, the rose would seem to kind of shrivel and die. And then when he thought about when his baby was born and all these kinds of things, he would look at the rose and the rose would seem like it was glowing and it was bright and alive. Anyway, this experience of seeing the rose die off and kind of come back to life and created this biofeedback, I think, for him.
Totally. Great.
And 40 years later, he still hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. He didn't go through any other program. It was just this.
Yep.
And that potent reset button on his brain was enough. So this shamanic potential here,
Yes.
because what is shamanism? When it's this journey right into the underworld,
Yes.
the darkness, into all the things, the poisons of the world, and sometimes being torn apart in a million bits, eaten by wolves, and all this shamanic kind of metaphors that happen. This experience. I don't even want to say metaphor; it's an experience.
Yes.
And sometimes it's utilizing psychoactive chemicals. Sometimes it's drumming and exhaustion. But the point is, you're pushing yourself to the limits of your psyche and expanding beyond what is there.
Yep.
But also acknowledging what is there fully.
Yes.
It's a shamanic experience. So
Yes.
again, this is kind of crossing over into the idea of that which is beyond, right? That was beyond us. And as I said that, the howling
coyote howls
coyote
in the
just
distance.
howled. I
In the
love
distance.
Cue the
when
coyote.
the field
Cue
interacts
the
with what
coyote.
you're doing.
Isn't
We're
that
talking about
great?
that
Yeah.
which is beyond, and I love it. It's
Well
so perfect.
said,
Well played,
coyote.
sir. Well played.
yeah.
And we had
played.
we had a
Nice.
wild dog run through here just a few
A
minutes
wild
ago.
black
too.
dog.
I know, that was so cool.
That was random. I've never seen that dog before.
Shut up.
It's not my dog.
yeah, that person apologized to us because the dog came in and said hi to everybody.
Oh
and
my
then-
God,
Those
Yeah.
are the neighbors dog.
Dog just wanted to connect.
Oh, I
that's
know.
all. Yeah.
Yes, it did. He's like, there's a connection party in there.
It's so fascinating. I mean, these two, Oliver and Satch, know that I've been studying something called systemic work or family constellations. And it is all about this topic in a way, dealing with trauma, dealing with transgenerational kinds of trauma,
Yes.
and the fact that we are a system exposed by systems within systems within systems, and we interact with others who are also the same, and therefore, where do our systems touch?
Yes.
Where do they cross over? Where do they connect?
Yeah.
And utilizing your sensory awareness to pay attention to the physical signs in your environment that are actually communicating with you. Now, I'm not sure if that came through the microphone or not, but there was another howl in
And
that
it was-
moment.
it was
And one of the most
pristine.
beautiful howls I've heard in a long
That
time.
was really nice.
You don't usually hear coyotes with gorgeous voices like that.
You
That was
don't.
really
I
pretty.
mean, that was almost wolf-ish.
And
Yeah.
it was like,
And what did I say about
solo,
being
there weren't any other
devoured by
competing
wolves?
sounds. Yeah. And meanwhile, they're coming.
Right.
Yes. I love that you touched on the LSD research, though, because I want to jump in and say there's this great book called Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. I think it came out last year. Oh, it's so good.
Michael Pollan is awesome.
Oh, he's so good. And the research on LSD therapy in the 50s was unbelievable.
Off the hook.
Oh my gosh, off the hook for depression and for addiction.
They finally reopened it.
Yes, yes.
The coyotes are very excited about that.
The children of the night, what sweet music they
They're
make.
so good. Hi guys.
Sounds like it's getting
Love you.
closer too, though.
They are getting closer.
Yeah, that did sound closer. And they sounded more excited too. They're like, yeah, they're this way. They're this way.
Definitely.
Speaking of meat suits, I smell 4 of them.
Totally. Yeah, Johns Hopkins.
Yes.
What was it? However many millions of dollars that they just decided to
So exciting.
open up research for psychedelics again.
So exciting. There were international conferences on it in the 50s, tons of great literature. It was just this, preeminent thing. In the book, he talks about Bill W. from
Oh, yeah.
having a psychedelic experience.
There's a famous story. Yeah.
And that he brought this to AA and said, listen, this is the key. And they were like, that's off brand.
Yep.
We can't endorse
He was buddies with
psychedelic
Tim
therapy.
Leary.
Yeah. So really fascinating. It's like,
Yeah.
and that the idea of being, so for me, the psychedelic experience is this overwhelming oneness, not, and again, like overwhelming, not incremental, but an overwhelming feeling where the me side is completely just showered and flooded with we, and there's no escaping it. The identity can't put up the character armor, that it rips the armor off and just, goes, come here, give us a hug. You come on. No, put that armor down. It's okay. It's safe. It's going to be okay. And you're like, no. And finally you're just like, oh, holy shit.
Oh my gosh.
And then you just come back and you're just like, hi. And nothing looks the same. And nothing seems the same because you got reconnected. And I
Torn
love,
apart and re-assimilated.
That's it. That's it. So I love the research that's happening with ibogaine, with ayahuasca. I'm all about all of the plant-based medicines being used. Yes. I'm just like, please more, and just please more of all of that, because I think that so this is fascinating. One of the techniques in music therapy is called guided imagery to music. And it's creating an altered state of consciousness in the brain and then listening to a set of prescribed music by the therapist. And the therapist is the guide and the patient is the traveler, and they go on a trip. And in the 70s, that Helen Bonny, the like pioneer of it, would use LSD, but her problem with it was it would just last too long. Because it's just so long acting. It was just too long acting.
The musicians were exhausted by the
You know what I
end
mean?
of the
It
10
was
to
like
12
they're having,
hours.
like, you want to have like a 90-minute to a 120-minute, session, and then 4 hours later they're still going, and you're just like, this isn't it.
Should have done psilocin or psilocybin.
There you go.
It's much shorter acting.
Yes,
and
it's true.
shorter lived.
So she found out that there's a very specific breathing technique that they used that achieved the same altered state of consciousness And so the Bonnie technique or the Bonnie method of guided imagery to music, BMGIM, that's terrible. Really, Bonnie method of guided imagery to music uses a very specific breathing technique, and you trip. No joke, because I did it and I was high as fuck and I was tripping balls on breath. And it was a real wake up call because it was this moment where I recognized that breath and music can induce just as powerful of an altered state of consciousness as anything I'd ever taken recreationally up until that point. And I was at that point like a music therapy student who was like pretty straight laced at that point. It wasn't like anything was lingering in the system. I was like knee deep in my scholastic work when I had this experience. And I can still tell you details of my trip to this day. And it was probably 2004 or 5 when it happened.
Wow.
Really interesting,
It
know?
is.
And so like, I'm really interested in that because one of the things I'm always preaching to my patients and to people when I'm doing keynotes or I'm doing workshops is like, when I learned that breath and music can reset the nervous system and can lead to altered states of consciousness, that was so empowering.
That's juicy.
Because anywhere I go, here's the rub, anywhere I go, I have access to both.
Yep.
Because in the present moment, I do have some control over my breath. I can choose my inhalation, exhalation rate. Like I have control over that in the present moment. If I'm present and I'm present to my breath, I can control my breath.
Yep.
My body is an instrument. I do not need an external anything to make music. And as far as the brain's concerned, I don't even need to sing for my brain to respond as if I'm singing. So if I audiate, which just means think about this melody, the same neuro
Receptors.
magic happens as if I actually sing. And so I can audiate and I can induce the same response. So I have, they're both in me. I'm wired, I come pre-wired with breath and music, which to me is like, I come pre-wired to completely regulate this nervous system that runs the show. And these, like I would love to, God, we could go for 8 hours in this conversation because I would love to dig into talking about conscious, subconscious, and how it overlaps with the nervous system, the 3 gears, and what gears are activated and because, we talk about like when there's a parasympathetic or a sympathetic response, the prefrontal cortex switches offline, the amygdala switches online, right? And like, so then how does that affect, your subconscious? Like, where is that taking place in the brain systems in regards to the 3 states of our nervous system? Because in order to connect, the first thing we need is to feel safe.
Yes.
That's right.
Right. And so, and I didn't mean to point at you like,
Oh,
but
no,
I
I
was
love
circling back to this thought
Yeah,
about the guys at your treatment facility.
Yeah.
And I was thinking back like, well, what's the precursor to connection? It's safety.
Yeah. Neuroception of safety is the bottom line. You have to have that.
Have to
Otherwise,
have
you
it.
can't.
Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, there it is at the base.
Right.
Survive, be alive, be okay.
And it's, and for me, I've adopted kind of like a 4 point approach to my teaching for recovery, which is that we're a physical, mental, social, and spiritual self. And that we can experience pain in all 4 categories. So we can trigger the nervous system in all 4 areas, right? So you can have physical pain, you can have a traumatic pain or chronic pain, right? Physical pain. You can have emotional pain, which could be grief, right? It could be the feeling of being alone. Like there's all kinds of, you put depression in there, you put anxiety states. Those are like emotional pain. Social pain can be social anxiety. It can be bullying. Spiritual pain can be the trauma of growing up in a hyper-religious family telling you you're going to go to hell, which is what my story was, right? So you can experience it in all these 4 categories. So you really need to feel safe physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. And once you have that precursor of that 4 part of safety, because I think it's more than just psychological or physical. Like you really need to feel safe as a whole person. Now you've given your nervous system permission to default back to what it's designed to do, which is just open up and connect.
great.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and since we can use music to do that and we can use breath to do that, anywhere I go, I'm designed to be able to re-regulate anywhere I go.
God, I love this.
Whether I
awesome.
do
This is
or
great.
I don't
Yeah.
is the game itself.
Yeah. Wow.
That's the court. The knowledge of how the game works isn't the game. It's executing the game I know to hit a forehand right down the line, right? I know to do it because I know but whether I can actually execute that move, I get satisfaction not from beating that guy. I get satisfaction that I executed the move in the moment that was indicated. And in the game of life, for me, these are the games. Like the medium, the game itself is life. And the game is to re-regulate so that I can reconnect.
I want to just ask a couple just down-to-earth practical questions.
Yes.
I mean, we were just soaring out into the universe with some of the
fun.
stuff, right? I
Yeah.
love it. Music therapy.
Yeah.
What are some of the practice settings that music therapists work in?
Yeah. So a lot of us work in educational settings with IEPs, working with kids with intellectual or developmental disabilities, really targeting music as a tool to help increase whatever their goals in their IEP are. So if attention span and appropriate social behavior are targets, we can actually strengthen those life skills through musical interaction.
So like through the school system?
Yeah, through the school system.
Do music therapists get, or do they end up getting contracted through, or like
Yes.
they get hired or just kind of brought in as
sometimes depends on the school
consultants?
district. They might have a position in the school district where you work for the school district.
Regional center.
Yeah, you might be involved in a regional center as well, or you might be in private practice and your agency contracts with the school district and provides the services.
Yeah.
So my company provides music therapy to a school for kids with special needs, comes in a certain number of hours per month to do music therapy in the classroom with the students. Others do it one-on-one. That can depend on the setting, on the budget, on the needs. And we work across the lifespan. And so the joke is we work womb to tomb.
Womb to tomb. I love it. I love it.
So fascinating research on music therapy with premature neonates. Wow. So we do work in the neonatal intensive care unit. Wow. Fascinating research in there. Yeah. Wow. And then early childhood, working with kids. And then kids with autism, again, similar to kids who fall under the ID&D category, the intellectual and developmental disabilities. Really great research on music therapy and kids with autism. And then music therapy for the treatment of neurological disorders, whether it's a stroke or it's a traumatic brain injury or it's dementia. Alzheimer's.
I've seen some of that, some fascinating stuff.
Yeah, so really great research, particularly for patients with brain injuries. Gabby Giffords is a kind of a celebrity example. So she was taught to speak again through singing. So because singing is a proto-language and music's a proto-language, it's a pre-language. So developmentally and evolutionarily, we sing before we speak.
Yeah,
So all kids sing first before they have language, and then they put words to music. Makes sense in the timeline?
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Evolutionarily, that's the same belief, is that we sang as a species before we spoke. Okay. And so we used it as a pre-language first form of communication was musical.
Well, I don't know a single person that forgets their ABCs because of the song.
Ding. Yes. So we can use
I still
music.
remember jingles from the 1980s.
Me too. Yeah.
Pretty fascinating, right? How that works. I love doing that with the way that our brain just encodes melody. It's just as if there's a gear waiting for, like a file just waiting to open it up, right?
Yeah.
So the brain really likes music, and the field of neurological music therapy just really has done a great job of really exploring the intersection of how we can use music to recruit the brain and the body to do things that it's struggling to do in a non-musical context. So we'll use music as the kind of the highway. So we'll kind of hack the system with music. So stroke patients, they'll teach them to sing their needs to their nurses.
Yeah.
And then they'll generalize the singing back to speech. And that's how and so different neural networks will be used in the process of singing than there are in speech, because speech is very localized, but singing's global.
So cool.
Music's very fascinating in that respect. So
Very,
it
very
recruits
interesting,
all the redundant pathways. So it kind of bypasses where the injury is. Recruits other areas to do the work.
It's like a digital bypass surgery.
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah, I love it.
It's
muscle
not
recruitment.
It is. It's muscle. It's neural recruitment, and it's very slow. It's very iterative. It's not like 15 sessions, and you're speaking again. It's also really hard to standardize. So one of the great, more philosophical discussions in music therapy is that music being organized sound, that might be the most general definition I've ever heard, because then you start like cutting parts of that have been defined as music as, no, sorry. So it's just organized. Whoever's the author makes the rules. I organized this sound in this way, including 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, which is a well-known piece of music by a guy named John Cage. And he organized the silence, and it's performed publicly. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, and it's the ambient sound of the room. That's the music, because that's the way he determined it. So I just think that's fascinating. But when we get down to like, how are we using it on a daily basis with stroke patients and with TBI patients, it's like more like rhythm. It's more the perception of rhythm in the brain that we're stimulating in those cases.
More of like a timing aspect.
It's a timing aspect. Yeah. So it primes like the motor cortex when we're going to walk. So patients who have had a stroke and are doing gait training with their physical therapist will regain gait in about 55% of the time that it takes a patient without music therapy added to the gait training.
It's a bit of a loud one. Yeah.
I know you guys have this like internal mind, like, oh, it's a loud one.
Yeah.
I hear a loud one coming.
Yeah. Exactly.
You guys just give each other the look at this point. Like,
we try to go on.
It's happening.
Right.
what are the big giant FedEx planes?
They're
huge, right? It's that was
God.
a FedEx. Like,
Holy moly.
Yeah, I've seen and used what you're talking about in occupational therapy practice.
Nice.
Like for example, one of the things you learn when you work in geriatrics is that you have a lot of old fellas in there that were in the military.
Yes.
And they can't walk very well, but they sure can march. And if you remember that, because it was trained in them, march. And if you give them, all right, here we go, left, right. and they get into a rhythm and they can walk. It's unbelievable how well that works.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. So something you don't know, Tim, my wife has multiple sclerosis. Okay. And so she's pretty cognitively disabled at this point, and she's having a lot of difficulty speaking, right? It could be, she can speak. It's just, you could tell there's a lot of, like when she's trying to speak or thinking about speaking, you can tell she just doesn't have any motor planning. There's just no motor planning there. And one of the things that I can do to get her to speak is just get her to say, ah. Say, okay. Hey, darling, are you comfortable? And I don't get anything. Sweetheart, say ah. Say ah. And she'll go, ah. Okay, and then I try to use, like in Hinduism, the universal om. Mm-hmm. Okay, say om. She'll go, om. And I'll say, are you comfortable? She'll go, uh-huh. So then she can speak to me if I get her doing an om or an ah.
Yeah, you've primed that system.
Yeah, and then she can
music.
ride that wave into saying something else. And it's the only way I can get her to get her needs known. You know what I mean? Is to do that. So
it's really great.
Yeah, so it's kind of fascinating. And so that's what the kind of stuff you do all the time for all different kinds of things in music therapy. Right?
Yeah, so you start to you start to look at who the patient population you want to serve. You know what their challenges are. You know what music can do, and you start to think about how you can hack in with music as this like stealth tool to help them with what they're already trying to do. So in the recovery world, as we go back to SOBER, the acronym that I created, so we do a lot of drumming in groups. We call it clinical improvisation. We bring rhythmic instruments. We show the patients or the clients or the residents how they're played. And then I'll say, all right, guys, I'm going to create a steady beat on the bass drum here. And then your job is to explore the sounds of the instruments and then just connect the sounds to the beat. Explore and connect. Those are your instructions.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. And we're going to do like 4 rounds. So you're going to play like 4 different instruments along the way. Okay. All right, cool. So there we go. And we go through the process. And at the end of it, like, okay, now what'd you connect with the most? And which number was it? Was it the first thing you played, second, third, fourth? I connected with the buffalo drum. It was the third thing. I connected with the shakers. It was the first thing. I connected with the something. It was the fourth thing. Great. That is life. That's a metaphor. Explore and connect.
Mm-hmm.
No one but you will know what regulates you. And my sponsor's definition of sobriety is that it's a mutually explored definition of what's good and bad for you.
That's great. Could you say that one more time?
Yeah. Sobriety is a mutually explored definition of what's good and bad for you.
I like that.
Wow. Yeah, I'm glad you repeated that.
yeah,
It
there's
really
this-
sunk in the second time.
Yeah, there's something there. If people want to continue to be addicted to awesomeness, what is your website and how can they learn more about this and see you speak?
That was very kind.
That was clever.
Yeah, you can just timringgold.com is where I'm at. Yeah, first name, last name. And then when you go there, I'll give you a gift. So I'm all about resetting the nervous system with music. So there's this thing I call the relaxation vacation. Because you're not going to take any other kind of vacation anytime soon. So it's a guided experience where I'm playing slow tempo classical guitar so your nervous system can entrain and slow down and to the music while I take you out of the present moment back to a safe memory you choose, because I don't know what's in your traumatic history or not. I'm not going to suggest you go to a beach. You might have had a friend drown in a rip current and you get triggered, right? So I let you choose the safe memory of your choice. I walk you back through it till you're experiencing it in the present moment and bring you back feeling connected, feeling safe, and taking those feelings from that moment and applying them into the stress that you're facing in the present. So if you want to take a relaxation vacation, it's free. Just go to my website. You'll see my bald head, and then you'll say, want to take a relaxation vacation? And you'll say, why, yes, Tim, I'd love to. And just follow the instructions.
It's a great gift. That's a
Click.
really loving gift.
I appreciate that.
That's great. Yeah. I'm going to check it out.
It's been an honor because I use music to help and heal, not to entertain. And so the feedback I get from the relaxation vacation, when I get emails from people like, I'm struggling with sleeping. Sleeping's a huge issue for me. I've been able to sleep now because of your relaxation vacation. My kid uses it to fall asleep every night. I just get these wonderful, how people use it to help them in their journey recover their rhythm is like the most
That's great.
gratifying experience as a musician.
You might help me fall asleep tonight. We'll
There you
see.
go.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly most entertainers, they're not out to put their audience to sleep.
Yeah.
For me, job done.
Success.
Yes, another snoring audience member. My work's done here.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Very special thanks to our guest, Tim Ringgold. My name is Oliver Althoen. I produce the show. I also wrote our theme music, which you're listening to right now. And the interstitial music this time is a little tune I whipped up in my home studio. I called it Robot House. Please subscribe to The Authenticity Show if you haven't already done so, wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on social media, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, check out our YouTube page, and you can find our website at authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.